How we doing, class? Welcome to our first attempt at getting through the articles and working through our questions. And I will freely admit this is new to me, just as it's new to you. So we're going to see how we do here. Okay? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the articles, which I have here. I want to give you my take of the articles, and then I'm going to go through your particular questions that you have. Okay? First one. What the hell is market oriented? And maybe just for the sake of it, I'm going to put this image up there for you to have. Now, this article, to me, frames the entire class. I'm not sure I could say it any other way other than firms that are market-oriented succeed. Firms that are not market-oriented struggle. Now, when we talk about market orientation, we see three items in this article that are particularly noted on. The first one is on page 120. Right-hand column. I'll always do this just for the sake of it. Right? And it says, information on all important buying influences permeates every corporate function. So that's item number one of market orientation. Item number two on page 121. Tactical and strategic and tactical decisions are made interfunctionally and interdivisionally. And finally, on 122, we have divisions and functions make well-coordinated decisions and execute them with a sense of commitment. Broadly speaking, when I opened this up and said that firms that are market-oriented succeed, it's because, as per that blog post I sent you guys, market-oriented firms have an incredibly strong external orientation towards customers, an incredibly strong external orientation towards competition, and the hardest of them all is the strong inter-firm communication between divisions. Now, what we have here, these are called silos. Now, we've all seen a farm, we've all seen these individual, stacks like this up along a barn, along here. The common business parlance is a functional silo. And when they mean, we're really talking about a strategic business unit. Like, this could be the music division, and this could be the movie division. And the executives of the music division and the executives of the movie division don't talk to each other. They don't coordinate. They are like a separate, independent, standalone company. A non-market-oriented firm that easily comes to mind is Sony. Sony has all these strategic SBUs. They are functional silos. They're independent. They actually compete against each other with the C-suite above for resources. And if you think about it, the iPod came out in 2001. Sony was already making MP3 players. Sony already had 25% market share in the recording industry. Sony already had a movie studio with movies. They had all the elements to outdo Apple before Apple even entered the market, yet they didn't do it. They had the various divisions heads. The recording company division was trying to do one strategy, which was polar opposite of what the movie company was trying to do. They worked against each other, and they were part of the same company. This is non-market orientation in action. If we look at the beginning of this article, right on the front page, we see the CEO scowled at him. I said market-oriented, not marketing-oriented. And we scroll over to page 120 on the top on this side, and we see Functional silo sales VP. We need this. Manufacturing or operations VP. We need this. Research and development VP. We need this. Finance. We need this. General manager. These are all individual managers trying to gain resources to protect their fiefdoms. That's not how market-oriented firms work. Market-oriented firms really communicate across the firm, okay, in order to execute. Now let's go through, and even though I sent you a couple of links with regards to market-oriented versus non-market-oriented, every time I see one of these I try to throw up a post. But here's one from the Washington Post. Microsoft has been in the news a lot lately. Microsoft is one of my recent poster childs for not being market-oriented. Basically, Microsoft has a series of fiefdoms that do not work well together. So what's behind Microsoft's fall from dominance? Let's just take a quick image of this, a look at this image here. So what we're looking at here is a graphic and change from the year 2000 to the present day. And we have various companies: Microsoft, Apple, Dell, RIM, HP, Cisco, and Amazon. So in this 13-year period, Microsoft's stock price is actually down 40%. The market cap is only up 54%. Their revenue in 13 years is up 220%. If you think about it, that's actually somewhat an impressive number. However, their profit change from 2000 to 2012 is only up 80%. You're trying to tell me the juggernaut of all juggernauts from the year 1990 to year 2000, that their next 10 years, they were only going to be up 80%? That's a firm that's struggling with the market. Real quick, let's do Apple. Not surprising, not surprising. This is incredible. 1,800% increase in 13 years. Profit, 5,200% increase in 13 years. Amazon, who I believe is a very market-oriented firm, this really scares me down here. I can't believe that their profit's down 3,000% in the last 13 years. That's very scary for a company whose stock is really out of control, i.e. doing this well. Real quick, Microsoft, not market-oriented. Apple is an anomaly. For multiple reasons, I don't think they are as market-oriented. Because although they spend a lot of time on competition, they do not spend as much time listening to customers. But what Apple does better than any other firm that I can think of is they have the incredibly strong inter-firm communication. Okay? They see across divisions. Like, they will let a division, the iPod division, basically flounder because it's the iPhone that's taking the dominance away from the iPod. They can see, why create the mini iPad that will directly impact sales of the larger iPad? Well, it's because it's better for the overall health of the firm, Apple. When you have functional silos, the server division within Microsoft was certainly not doing anything to help out the Xbox division where they could have. You see what I mean? The only way that we have this broad overall structure is if, guess what? It's coming from the C-suite and it comes down across the silos. Apple explicitly is a company that avoids the silos. They don't have product lines. There's no head of VP for iPhone. There's no senior vice president for iPad. Why? Because then that senior vice president for iPad will do what you logically would do. You would try to gain as much resources to make you and your division look the best. For those of us who are Apple zealots like myself, it's almost a year ago today that Scott Forstall got fired from Apple. Scott Forstall came to Apple with Steve Jobs in his second tenure. Scott Forstall was the most likely to be named CEO after Tim Cook. Scott Forstall got fired. Why did Scott Forstall get fired? The same reason that on page 124 at Wolverine, the sales VP got fired. Scott Forstall stopped coordinating across divisions. He was the head of software for iOS, which is iPad and iPhone, which is 76 to 80% of all Apple sales. So he had enormous clout within the firm because he was responsible for the majority of their revenues. However, he was not making the sacrifices across the divisions to help the other divisions excel, particularly Mac, and particularly how they wanted to advance iPhone even further. He was sacrificed, and it was a huge surprise. It also, you know, not to get on too much of a tangent, but he was known as Mini Steve. He had a very rough personality. He did not get along with people. He did not want to. There are certain senior vice presidents of Apple who would not sit in the same room with the guy. Well, you can't be market oriented. You can't plan forward if your executives won't sit in the same conference room. Let me see a couple other things from this market oriented article real quick. Make sure I got everything. You know, I like this here on page 123. I'm up here. It says, the top management also decided that bonus plan encouraged each function to pursue its own objectives instead of corporate-wide goals. So, if each function did their own thing, guess what? That's more non-market oriented. You know, a firm that is oriented towards the market will make decisions that are best given what's happening in the marketplace. Okay. Let's see. Anything else here? To conclude this article, I want to go to the very end, when they keep using this Larry Bird metaphor, who's probably one of the best basketball players of all time. And the article ends with the last 3 lines. Bird is the epitome. He subverts his own interests and ego for the sake of the team. That's what I want to see at Wolverine. In other words, the egos of these various functional silos at Sony could not subvert themselves. Therefore, they held Sony back, and company after company, Apple then Samsung, surpassed Sony during the last 10 years. Let me see if I can answer some questions here. Let's start off in class. I know this is the first time we try to do this semester, but I'm using Tiffany and her team here as an example here. This really was well organized, and going forward, I think this is the best way to do this. We have the title of the article, we have our specific nuggets, and then we have our specific questions per the article. You know, we could pull up another one. Neil and Company did the same kind of thing. Article, nuggets or takeaways, questions. Okay? Now we had another team here that did their nuggets, and then they have all the questions at the back end. That's okay, but I would prefer this kind of a style because it's easier for me in this kind of a format where I'm going to talk about the article and then I'm going to go into the questions right away. So let's do Tiffany and team questions. Why would a company change a procedure or a product that is working or is profitable and risk it possibly failing as opposed to fixing a product that's not working to make it profitable? just because it's working and just because it's profitable means that it's working and profitable now. But you have to understand that companies are constantly under pressure because customer behavior changes. Competition on a daily and weekly basis changes. And what happens is something that a company was doing, 2-3 years ago that was going well, all of a sudden in the new marketplace reality is not going so well. And if they didn't change with the trends both in consumer behavior and competition, you're going to be caught flat-footed. This is exactly what happened to Microsoft. If you think about it, Microsoft had this dominant monopoly, and the article does a very good job of outlining this. It started off with, actually I'm not going to read that right now. Let me leave the question up. Is this Tiffany's questions? Yeah. First, if you had 95% market share, pretty much every machine that was being shipped around the world had Microsoft on it. Well, guess what? That's a huge revenue stream. Then you have Microsoft Office as another dominant monopoly. Well, because Microsoft in the 1990s were spending so much time on the operating system and so much time on Office, they missed the internet. Flat out, they were late to the game. They were late with Internet Explorer. In the first 3-4 years of Internet Explorer, guess what? It was not as good as Netscape or Firefox or any of the other browsers we were using way back then. Because they were not oriented towards the market, they ignored the rise of the internet. And to take the same metaphor further, they spent so much time on what they were doing with internal politics and internal divisions and maintaining their existing monopolies, even though they were very profitable. They missed social in the early 90s, early 2000s. And then they were trying to play catch up with social and search. They missed search. They also missed mobile. They were in mobile for, in a major way. Somehow or another, they backed off mobile. And now they're completely caught flat-footed over the last 3-4 years. They had to do this monster marketing deal with Nokia, which is also an also-ran that has not been market-oriented. Even though they were the #1 player for so long, they missed Nokia ignored the smartphone market. And now we have a merger of Microsoft and Nokia, two firms that are also RANs in their various industries that they're going. If you don't constantly stay ahead, even if you have a profitable business now, it will change and it will not last. I mean, in the early 90s, in the mid-90s, Dell was my poster child for a market-oriented firm. Not so much. In the early 2000s, Motorola was a very market-oriented firm. They couldn't maintain it. I hope that answered this question. Why would a company automatically put its customers' interest on the top or priorities? Now, this is a difficult thing where it's not that you should always put your customer first and listen to your customer first, but you better be listening to what's going on. You have that balance between, okay, what competitive pressures am I going to respond to or not? What customer interests am I going to respond to or not? And how am I going to coordinate that information in between my various divisions that we can, as a company, take this knowledge and go forward? That's the hardest part. We know that firms can monitor consumers. We know that firms pick up the Wall Street Journal or read the Wall Street Journal and they see what's happening. But most firms have a very hard time dealing with that information because they're stuck in functional silos. The information gets stuck in a silo or silos don't work together, and the C-suite's not strong enough to break that culture to make the firm go forward faster. Okay? Let's try here. Oop. This is Tiffany's team. Okay. Shapiro, this is Neil and company's team. Let me see if I can get a little more. Shapiro says that not all business is good business, and Wolverine has had to drop a large account if it wanted not to accept higher prices. I understand, but isn't this risky? Wouldn't external pressures like shareholders and the potential for bad press make this harder than Shapiro makes it out to be? Well, it certainly is much harder than Shapiro makes it out to be. It's sort of like a self-cannibalization, okay? And very few firms have the ability to do this self-cannibalization, either through divesting a business, even though it has a very good revenue stream, or creating a product that completely undermines a market that they're currently in. It's very difficult. It's hard for me to come up with an example off the top of my head of a company that absolutely positively killed one of their own businesses. The easiest example, and this is not directly to this question, is Gillette. Gillette is a company that believes in self-cannibalization, and they believe in not standing still. Even though they had the #1 wet shave razor in the world, even though they had a double-digit market share lead versus the #2, they still spent $1 billion and came up with Fusion. And because they spent those resources, and because they outpaced the competition that much more, it's almost like, okay, look, even though I have this much of a lead, I'm not going to sit on it. I'm going to innovate even further, and I'm going to move beyond what competition is. Now, this isn't directly related to this question, I understand. But if you have a product line that is holding you back from going forward, you might sell the division. And companies do sell divisions all the time. How exactly do you get people to think of a company as a whole rather than in their own departments? What incentives need to be put in place? Well, Apple doesn't have departments. And Microsoft in August sent a 3,000-word memo from Ballmer, who's now the outgoing CEO, that basically is getting rid of product line silos in Microsoft, and now it's going to be based on functional lines. Let me see if I can real quick. I should have thought of this in advance. Let me see if I can get you an org chart from Apple. Support, environment, sitemap, job opportunities. It's going to be environment, sitemap, about us, support, public relations, press releases, images, Apple leadership. Here we go. These are the executive profiles at Apple. Okay, we have a CEO. We have a Senior Vice President of Internet Software and Services. We have a Senior Vice President of Software Engineering. We have one for design. We have finance. We have hardware, marketing, legal, and operations. This is how flat the organization is here. Now, if you want to talk about product lines within Apple, if you want to talk about Apple TV, if you want to talk about the new iPhones that just came out this week, the new iPods that are going to come out in October, well, a new iPod needs input from design, the software, iTunes, okay? It's hardware. We need the parts to manufacture it in Asia, and then someone's got to market it. This is strong inter-firm communication here. Let me see if I can pull up a Microsoft one real quick. Let me see if I can do it just as fast with Microsoft. Download, support, shop, Windows, preview, Office. This seems like their consumer page. Microsoft. company. Corporate tech, Microsoft blog, events, press releases. About Microsoft, executive biographies, senior leaders. So here we go. CEO, Vice President of Business Development and Evangelism, HR, Finance, Devices and Studios, Applications, Operating Systems, Cloud and Enterprise, Advertising and Strategy, Marketing, Advanced Strategy and Research, General Counsel, Business Solutions. You know, on the surface here, this doesn't look all that different. You know, but we know that within Microsoft, your pay structure is a function in how you're, not only your pay structure, but, you know, how you're organized within the corporation is a function based on product lines. You know, the office people don't talk to the service people. The Xbox division is not even in the same building. It's somewhere else. You know? All right. Apple. So, oh, wrong. You know, I hope this answered this question a little bit here. You know. All right. Let's go to, oh, now here we are. How would you quantify cooperation between departments? Well, that is a very good question. We're going to see something within the in the next article where I had a question about, not that actually it's here, so let me hold off on that. But basically, when we have cooperation between departments, you know, we see things get done that wouldn't get done within a silo. You know, the OS for Apple and this new OS, OS 7 that's coming out, you know, we're going to see what's happening for iPhone get morphed into iPod and iPad. You know, that's how that happens between departments. But if we had a fiefdom for iPod versus iPad, they would be upset that iPhone got the OS first, which is exactly what's happening. You know. Is it really good idea to focus on a select group of customers? Wouldn't at a broader view, is it really good to focus on a group of customers? Wouldn't the broader view open some growth opportunities? It depends. It really depends on what the firm's goals are. If the firm has to go after a particular segment of customers, and by doing that, they have to align operations with product and software, then that's the only thing that they could do right now. You know, it's probably better to do one thing really well than to do three things half-assed. Could you select on one group and then go forward and attack another? Perhaps. That might be the best way to do it. But, you know, this again is the same kind of SWOT analysis we've been doing in, you know, our MBA program forever. We look at our strengths, we look at our weaknesses internally to the firm. Externally, we look at opportunities and we look at threats. And we try to do what's best for us. Okay? Let's see. And I believe our last set of questions, I didn't have any market orientation questions here. Mike, Communities of Practice article. Okay. Very good. Let me go back down. Let's talk a little bit about the communities building a learning organization. You know, just so you know, of the 5 articles, my favorite one is the market orientation article. probably every class this semester we're going to talk about market orientation in some kind of a way. It's the basic foundation strategy for the whole class. Learning organization. Notice this was 1993, and the idea was continuous improvement programs. That's the first line of this article. This came from the culture of total quality management and service quality that was huge during the 80s, the early 1990s. And having a learning organization is exactly that. Going forward, learning. You know, I love the definitions that are on page 193. The various definitions of what a learning organization is. And here we have a learning organization is an organization skilled at creating, acquiring, and transferring knowledge and modifying its behavior to reflect new knowledge and insights. Well, guess what? If we think at the three things of market orientation, external consumers, external customers, strong interfirm communication, this is the strong interfirm communications. Firms that have this culture of learning and going forward are better market oriented. It's part of their culture. We see the building blocks of a learning organization is 1. Systematic problem solving. 2. Experimentation. 3. Learning from past experience, particularly sharing and disseminating that across divisions. 4. Learning from others, mainly competition. And finally, 5. Transferring the knowledge. As I said before, the interfirm communication thing is very difficult. It's why very few firms are market-oriented. But firms that have this idea that from continuous learning, continuous improvement programs have an easier time being market-oriented. Let's shoot over to our questions. Building a learning organization. How much risk becomes too much risk by incorporating the mantra of learning by doing and building a learning organization? How much productive failure is considered good in reaching the goal? You know, I'd listen to a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts and read a lot of entrepreneurial books. And it seems like firms that are younger in industries that are growing faster have a significantly higher tolerance for failure than firms that are well established in larger industries. So the right answer to this question is it depends on the culture of your firm. There's some firms that have mottos like, let's break some stuff. So they would rather see 10 people do 10 things, 9 of them be a failure, therefore you know that that's not going to work out, but the one that does is fantastic. Or of those 9 failures, 3 of those failures evolve into something absolutely amazing that they would have never got to unless they tried to do something. Firms that are afraid of failure, that are too risk averse, don't constantly lead. They're not on the cutting edge of things. And perhaps if you're in an organization like steel, I don't know, something that is not evolving as fast as something might be, then guess what? You might be more risk averse. But in Silicon Valley, when we're talking about all these digital technologies, you have to move as fast as you possibly can. You know, some corporations have no tolerance for failure. If that's the case, then you got to be really careful in those organizations because culturally it's not accepted. Isn't this half-life curve simply a statistical measurement? How does it accurately measure the interdepartmental communication of a firm? So here, this is the half-life curve. And what we have is we have a company, Analog Devices, and we have various divisions. A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Now, the idea would be, over time, you would learn from problems and improve. And if we look at Division C, which they call the clear winner, we see the steepest slope going this way, meaning from time A to time B, we saw the most continual improvement, which means the amount of time required to reduce shipments by 1/2. We see division D got worse. We see division G barely changed whatsoever at all. We see some improvement in A and B. E was flat, completely flat. F, we saw some improvement. But the idea of this continual improvement, so is it a statistical, anomaly the way this thing, well, yeah, okay, they had to figure out a way to graphically representate how much improvement was achieved over time. But just from illustrative purposes, we can see that some of these divisions learned from past behavior and decided to incorporate that new information to make things better. And some of the divisions did not. All right, let's see here. Building a learning organization. Questions? Do the five things organizations do overlap? Well, yeah. If we're doing continuous improvement, how we get to that continuous improvement is less important than where it comes from. Sure, there could be some overlap, and I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. The more important thing is they are communicating, and the more important thing beyond that is they're using that communication to improve the firm. Are there any organizations truly successful at all 3 M's? Are there any that have been and tried to be? Well, there are a lot of firms that are very good at disseminating information across. I mean, I was reading an article about Facebook earlier today. And Mark Zuckerberg was at a conference and he was talking about Twitter and their IPO. And he was very happy that Facebook had a horrible year because the firm is so much better now than they were a year ago. Mainly a year ago, less than 3% of their overall sales came from mobile. Now half of their sales came from mobile. We know the future is mobile. Facebook is not going to survive around the world and continue to grow without mobile and mobile products. So, here's a situation where they work fast. They tried some things. Not all their initiatives this past year were successful. Some of them were quite duddish, if you ask me. But they didn't stop, and they weren't afraid to stop. When an organizational learning fails, how can they trust management not to take into account their lack of success in their experimentation? Well, organizational learning fails when divisions and people in the firm stop communicating with each other and they stop trying to do things. They lose trust with management and the initiatives. See, some people think of an experiment as success or failure. It either works or it doesn't work. And you ignore the learning part from, you learn even if there's a success, you learn even if there's a failure. And you take that knowledge and go forward. There's some firms that only think that success is something from Wall Street. If Wall Street thinks it's good or we have a revenue stream, then great. There's a lot of firms that might do revenue and they're gaining revenue, but they're not optimizing their personnel or their operations to get that revenue. They're only happy because they have revenue. So firms that are not looking into the experimentation and the lessons that they learn from these initiatives, they're not market oriented. They're not going to go forward. Building a learning organization does take time, but how would you know if the direction you're going in is the right one? Are there steps along the way to ensure the organization's approach will be successful? Well, let's do the first part of this question. The first part of the question is, how do you know if it's the right one? Usually, you're better serving customer needs, and most importantly, you catch your competition flat-footed because you're doing something a step or two ahead of where they thought they needed to be. You know, so whatever steps you took to get there, you know, you either do more of the ones that got you ahead, or you rethink to say, okay, we were talking about this, but we didn't implement this fast enough, and Nokia beat us to the punch. You know, that kind of thing. All right. Next article, Communities of Practice. Of all the articles, this one is, you could say, the most pie in the sky, the most kind of floating out there. You know, I wrote here, if you can see, knowledge is king. This falls right into the same category as this kind of an article, where this is solely internal to the organization. This could be internal and external to the organization. Now, what I like most about this article is the snapshot comparison here on page 142. And this precedes a lot of companies. You know, there were companies that wanted to grow faster. The most obvious one that comes to mind is Procter & Gamble, who is a very market-oriented firm. And their CEO, Lafferty, decided, you know, Procter & Gamble was a company that would only innovate internally. And the CEO had to change this culture by saying, you know something, we can't grow as fast as we want to grow just with our own internal scientists. So they started using a whole consortium of external scientists, and more than 50% of all the innovations that Procter & Gamble got over a 10-year period came from scientists outside the company. You know, that Mr. Clean magic eraser thing was some scientist in Japan that was toiling away in a lab, that he was just on a wiki through Procter & Gamble, and he had this substance. And Procter & Gamble turned it into a billion-dollar product. You know, the thing is that communities of practice, you know, could expand beyond your own firm. And it's the idea of constantly seeking knowledge and being externally oriented. Now, the rest of this article and how they say and how they try to differentiate between the two, you know, it's a little fluffy if you ask me. You know, informal work group, project team versus informal network and communities in practice. I mean, I have a community of practice. You know, I want to learn more about social media. I organize lunches here in the Philadelphia area with executives from Comcast, Aramark, Campbell Soup, Burlington Coat Factory, Subaru, so I can learn what's the cutting edge that's happening in their field. To me, that's a community of practice. I also think our class is a community of practice. You know, I also feel that our social media technologies that we have help facilitate communities of practice easier than it's ever been done in the past. So let me answer this question right here. The Communities of Practice article seems to focus on internal communities within a company, but could it exist outside the organization? Absolutely and positively. In Silicon Valley, there are certain coffee shops that if you want to find an angel investor, you go here. If you want to talk to certain engineers, you go here. You know, these are all informal. They're all, you know, external to all the companies that they talk about. And pretty much in Silicon Valley, everybody talks. Does that cause conflicting goals or change it into an informal network instead of a community in practice? Well, I don't know about this part of the equation. And I'm not concerned as much whether it's informal, a practice group, a community of practice. The idea that you're talking and learning is what I care most about. Could it cause conflicting goals? It could. But how else do you gain the learning unless you try? Can you explain the idea of learning and experience curves further? I understand that cost and prices. I believe that we're talking that question is specific to the learning organization article. So I think I answered that one already. The internal enterprise. Okay, this is blogging. We didn't get to blogging yet. Let me see. Community of practice questions. It seems managers must start communities of practice the same way they start a team or a work group and intervene that is stuck. Same way a work group or team might go forward and manage devices B. Therefore, I'm not totally convinced of the difference between the practice groups and the teams, or the paradox, related to the question I just answered, let's not get too sticky with the various levels, and more on a broader, the idea of community of practice, the idea of continuous improvement, that knowledge can be gained from internal groups across divisions or from people outside the firm, that we can use this knowledge to make ourselves more market oriented. Page 144 describes a person who wanted to start a community of practice should do. What if no one in the organization takes the initiative to do so? Well, then the organization doesn't have a culture that really has continuous learning. What if no one wants to join the community? Same thing. The definition says these organizations are spontaneous. How can that be if someone personally starts them and gets the meeting times? Well, maybe someone has the initiative, but from then on and how it evolves is more spontaneous in nature. Okay. Next question. Is the anecdotal evidence really enough to assess the value of these groups and convince top management of the value of investing time and money in them? Anecdotal? No. No. But if we have, a strong culture of communication, and these communication come through various channels, and those various channels or groups or organizations, however we want to call them, are celebrated within the firm, then guess what? It's not anecdotal. It's part of the strategy of the firm. Just anecdotal? No, that's not enough. How can the data analysis accurately assess the contributions in the community of practice to make the bottom line? How can the data analysis... I'm assuming that we're talking about... Hold on. I don't recall there being an explicit amount of data analysis here. I mean, they're talking about different ways that you could measure the value, but, again, this is not an empirically based article. And, again, I just want to stress the overall philosophy of interfirm communication and the importance of using that knowledge to go forward. And perhaps the community of practice is one way to get there. The data analysis part, I'm not sure that we have really strong enough data analysis to say that there's a quantitative reason to go in this direction. It's more of a strategic or a cultural reason why we're going in that direction. If the communities of practice are informal groups of like-minded people, then shouldn't they form naturally through the normal course of businesses or networking? Why should a company focus on them? Well, maybe the company... They could be in different divisions. They could be in different geographical locations. If the company doesn't have a culture of people getting together and chatting, then how would these people meet? Perhaps, in the sales or marketing organizations, there's, the 6-month offshoot, that you might run into someone at a bar or an event or something along those lines, where you would meet someone across a different division that's doing something similar to you, or you have the same interests of them. But it shouldn't be a happy accident. It should be a more strategic alignment of. Okay? Communities of practice. Questions. In what situations or businesses where communities of practice would actually do more harm than good, or provide no positive output in the case of hand? Well, if none of the information was actually used strategically, then the communities of practice are just sitting around drinking coffee. I mean, they might as well, talk about the Eagles or something like that. Sports, golf, whatever. And then where could it be more harm than good? Well, if you want to hypostulate, say the Silicon Valley situation where they're meeting in these strategic coffee houses and people from different companies are getting together and they overshare. Well, there could be a little more harm than good, because then you're letting someone from another organization have a little bit too much information about something that they could usually strategically use. Okay. I think we're good with the Communities of Practice article. Again, these two articles were mainly in support of this article. Okay, this is the Mac Daddy. Now, let's do these two articles together. They are extremely similar, and they talk, as a way of us introducing the social media aspect to our overall strategic plan of this semester. We'll do the blogging one first, and then we'll talk about the other one. I'm going to get to something in a second, but I'm going to answer questions first. Let me make sure I have all my question sets up first. And I want not this one, that one. Okay. So here we have blogging. The article talks about blogging being low cost. Are they taking into account salaries to pay employees to focus on social media strategy? Probably not. But even if they were taking into account salaries to pay for employees, I mean, think about in an older school marketing situation when you're buying a Super Bowl commercial where it costs, $3.1 million for 30 seconds and $1.5 million to create that ad that only lasted 30 seconds. Well, they still have to pay the salary of that executive or that senior vice president that's in charge of that commercial. So in many sense, they are lower cost. But I don't want to say, please, if you hear anybody saying that social media is free, social media is cheap, they're not thinking about it the right way. On page 182, it says a study found that almost 60% of U.S. customers find marketing to be irrelevant to them. How was marketing defined in this study? Chances are it is top-down, one way, being targeted by firms when you don't want to be targeted. And by the way, this is just a study. Statistics can always be manipulated. I wouldn't put too much faith in that one statistic alone. Should companies hire impartial bloggers to generate buzz, even if they can't control the message? This is a hard question. Impartial bloggers to generate buzz. The best way is not to hire anyone, and that the buzz is generated by the community without being paid directly. And you may or may not be able to control the message, but that's the most viral of all content. Hiring bloggers is not the same thing as having the community generate the content themselves. Hold that thought, and I have a PowerPoint deck that I'm going to get to. If 60% of all U.S. customers find marketing to be irrelevant for them personally, 70% are interested in products and services that would help them block marketing attempts, then why shouldn't companies look to spend their marketing dollars elsewhere? Well, I agree. They are. You trust your contacts in Facebook more than you trust the people sending you information on TV ads. Which is why you see companies like Nike was one of the first Fortune 500 companies that 50% of their ad budget goes towards digital versus traditional. They were the first one. Procter & Gamble, each year the percentage goes up. They're somewhere in the mid to high 40s right now. Within the next year or two, without question, we're going to see Procter & Gamble's marketing budget tip past 40%, the 50% mark. You know, with so many bloggers and so many sites to post a blog, how does a company know how to differentiate themselves and where to post? Well, the difference is that people are looking for content, and you use something like a search engine to help you find the content. And only the content that you want to find, because that's what you're specifically looking for. You know, there are certain people that are interested in like a lifestyle, a worldview, and then there's a particular blog about that worldview, and then guess what? People coalesce around that. I mean, there's a certain number of blogs that I follow. Some are sports related, some are text related, some are strategy related. And I get information that are specifically related to that particular topic area. I don't see a whole bunch of other things. Posting of blogs to a unique site specific to a company would make the most sense, but then in order to create traffic to the site, how do you avoid falling into the standard marketing practices that U.S. customers are working to avoid? Well, what happens is the blogs tend to be very micro-oriented. There are very few broad, you know, like a newspaper covers all topics. Very few blogs cover all topics. The only reason to visit a blog is if you're interested in that specific thing. You know, so companies are looking. Let me just. I have to go back to this now. I can't avoid it any longer. Oh, open recent. There we go. I thought I had it open already. This PowerPoint deck that I'm loading up right now on the computer, I included this. It's now in the in our Blackboard underneath the content. There's a few things I wanted to talk about here. One, we have a question coming up, and we ask about the definition of social. Media is a means of communicating. You know, media tends to mean one-way communication. Social media, okay, by definition, is the two-way interaction. See, firms that are posting to blogs, and they're posting the same way they send a post to a reporter at a newspaper, or the AP wire, or they're placing an ad. If you only think of a blog or a social network as another way to send your message, then you're really missing the point. The whole idea for social media is there for it to be dialogue, interaction, cooperation. It's interdependent. If there's no two-way interaction, it's not social media. Point blank. Let's see, page down. Oh, sorry. So here's our definition. Social media are a means of communicating based on interdependent relationships and cooperation amongst friends and associates. You know, these are other various definitions. You can look at them when you get a chance. So here is when we're talking about media. Here's our dominant levels. We have television, still the most common of all media. Radio, rapidly losing its influence. Newspapers, rapidly losing its influence. Magazines, still rapidly losing its influence. Outdoors, the same. Direct mail, we still see, has a pretty low response rate. The book that I took the slide from calls it electronic or web, but this is really the world that we're living in with this class. Two-way communication, okay? It's more micro-targets. It's more one-to-one. And we're going to get to more of those readings this semester. So we see this shift. You know, when we talk about broadcast, radio, print, outdoor, the one-way traditional marketing messages are lower engagement. You know, when we have digital, just because it's digital doesn't mean it's completely higher engagement, because you could be just pushing. Emails does not mean it's digital, but that doesn't mean it's higher, you know, it's any better than a direct mail piece. It can be automated. At least you're targeting niche a little more. But when you have communities and you have blogs, microblogs as Twitter, you have higher in social engagement. You have the potential for dialogue, interactivity, and higher engagement. This is a mess. This is how most people tend to think about social media. They think about it in terms of what it is. This is how I like to think about social media, within zones. This is a way for me to organize the wild, wild west of social media. And the 4 zones are community, publishing, commerce, and entertainment. So when we're talking about community, we have Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+. These are our dominant social networks where we can maintain community. When we talk about publishing, these are our blogging platforms. When we talk about commerce, these are reviews. These are ways for us to generate revenue. These are ways for us to do ads like a Groupon kind of a thing, TripAdvisor. Finally, we have social entertainment. I mean, in my eyes, the main goal is really to build a user community. I have a CRM mentality. We're going to get to CRM 2 weeks from now. Because it is much cheaper to market to existing customers than it is to find new customers. We'll talk about the economics of that when we get to those readings. New customers tend to buy less than repeat customers. Repeat customers do more pro-social word-of-mouth behaviors. Social media is the best way to maintain, or one of the better ways to maintain, this type of relationship. It's the give and take. And if you think back to our market orientation articles, you think back to our other discussion articles that we got before this, we can learn from external constituencies through social media about how to go forward. And there's a lot of firms that use their social communities as a way for innovation development. Again, this PowerPoint deck is on Blackboard now. All right. So let me answer some of these questions. What is the main definition of social media? We took care of that. Okay, I think we're okay here. The proliferation of new media has proven to be a double-edged sword for marketers. When and what effect is more than the other? How to evade the disadvantages and develop the advantages? Well, it's a double-edged sword if your main goal is to control all the time. See, the upside to traditional media, with it being one way, is you control all of it. If you're involved in a community where you want dialogue and you want cooperation, the downside to social media isn't a downside. You want to hear whatever they want to hear. The negative aspects, so to speak. Does blogging replace traditional media such as TV and radio advertising? It can. I don't think for a lot of products it can. The lower involvement, Coca-Cola, mass market kind of things, no. And also, social media is slower in general about new product. You want a lot of people to find something about something fast, you do a TV ad. I really don't know if radio advertising is really effective at all. Let me answer the next set of questions here, and we can finish this one. Where are the most companies in social media spectrum have figured out how to effectively use social media as a business driver? The social media companies that have the most effectiveness using social media are companies that have a digital product, A, or B, their product can be directly delivered to the end user. One of the problems that say, let me pick this up. Burt's Bees, okay? Burt's Bees we use as retailers, so it's much more difficult for them to generate a community around Burt's Bees if you still have to go into CVS and buy it. There's another intermediary involved. But in companies where there's no intermediary involved, that the person generating the information and maintaining the community is also in charge and responsible for selling the product. That's a easier path, which is why you see social media used more in B2C environments versus B2B environments. You know, we're seeing it more in B2B. We'll get to that, but right now it's, you know, the other thing that we could relate to this is the more product is digital, books, movies, music, information, software, the easier it is to maintain a community and to do that information dissemination, community development, but also sales and service. What does the Web 3.0 look like? I really don't have any idea what the Web 3.0 will look like. But before I go into that, and I talk a little bit about this in the slide deck, Web 1.0 versus Web 2.0. We saw a lot of language in the last two readings about the Web 2.0. And basically, Web 1.0 was like 1991, 93, Netscape through 95, and then we had the first bubble develop from 95 until 2001. All these firms that were created between 93, 95 to 2001 were primarily firms that used the internet to do something that already existed. And they did not use the internet. All they were a digital representation of something else. You know, I wanted to be the first pet store on the internet, the first grocery store on the internet, the first doctor on the internet. Well, there isn't that much added value there. What happened was after the bubble burst in 2001, basically when AOL and Time Warner merged in a $110 billion merger that just really everybody threw their hands up and says, okay, this finally doesn't make any sense. And between 2001 and 2002, most of those firms really collapsed. We can count on our one or maybe two hands about the number of companies that survived the bubble. All the firms that started out in 2002, 2003, 2004, they were using the internet to do something you could not do in any other means other than electronic. So that's when we started to see two-way interactive social networking. You can't do social networking without a digital platform. So 1.0, we got the internet, but it was still more one way. 2.0, we got firms that started to say, okay, wisdom of crowds, bottom up, social networking, you know, SEO, SEM, and PPC. These were all scenarios where you could not do this in any other environment than the web. And that's the Web 2.0, basically since 2002 to now. Web 3.0, I've heard people throw the term around. There's no Web 3.0 yet. We still have not done a good enough job in Web 2.0. We're still out there in the weeds in the Wild Wild West. Will social media make us more productive or less productive as a society as as we get so many more and more information on the web? Will it make us more productive? Yes. Will it make us less productive? Yes. You know, we are struggling right now with the quantity and, more important, the speed of information that is getting to us. We don't know which sources to trust or not, and we're doing a lot of experimenting on what to trust and what not to trust. If you see something on the internet, it may or may not be true. But if there was something on broadcast news, then it probably was true because it was verified. There's a journalistic type mentality. And if you're reading a blog, it could be just someone's opinion. You know, so there's a lot to be worked out here. Mobile social media is quickly becoming the focus just as people are catching up with social media. How can companies leverage the most useful technology and effectively? All right. There's no question we're seeing a massive rise of mobile. You know, this is the dominant screen of choice these days. This is going to replace television. We're going to see more of this using than us sitting down actually watching TV. Now, what mobile is learning is that with a blog or the internet and this beautiful screen that I have in front of me, I can multitask. I can do different things. I have mouses, keyboards. It's easier for me to navigate. What's happening within mobile is things have to be more specific. Okay? Think about the old day. You wanted information, you sat in front of a computer, you did a Google search. In a mobile world, it's kind of a pain in the butt to do like a Google search the way we think of doing a Google search on a computer. So what we do is we tend to go, okay, I want restaurants, I'll go to Yelp. You tend to go to a more micro-oriented, specific search engine just for that topic. We call them apps. You know, if you want to know what you wanted to know what weather or visiting New Orleans would be like, you did a Google search when you were sitting in front of a computer, and you're easy to navigate and do all this other stuff. But in a mobile world, you know, you just download a New Orleans app, or you would just go to weather.com and look New Orleans directly. It tends to be more micro-oriented. So, you know, firms that are going to succeed in mobile have to realize, you know, it's got to be more bite-sized. It's got to be more user-friendly. It's got to be something someone can access quickly, because this just doesn't have the same search functions, or not search functions. It doesn't have the same keyboard access and functionality that you do when you're sitting down in front of a desktop. You know? All right. I think we're good there. The definition of social media is not great. All right, I gave you a better definition. How are virtual social worlds used from human resources in their... Well, for instance, let's talk about this from an HR perspective. You guys work at big companies. You have training. Well, there's no reason why there can't be a webinar on leadership to come out of HR. Right? There's no reason why all the operations people across divisions, across the world, can't have a common wiki to ask questions to the 140,000 scientists that are across the planet, that are both internal to the firm and external to the firm. This is what Procter & Gamble does. You know, it can work. Can you please cite an example of a company that you think is doing a great job of using social media for the benefit of the company while also establishing themselves as socially responsible? I think it's one of the outerwear companies. It's either North Face or Columbia, but I think it's Columbia. And they have an app specific, you know, that doesn't have anything about buying jackets. It's more about once you already have a jacket and you're out in the weeds, so to speak, or climbing or hanging off a cliff, all about better tying knots, how to survive cold weather temperature. You know, we see firms, let me see if I can pull up an email. So here's an organization that was started in Philadelphia, and it's now national, I believe. It's called Back on My Feet, and the organization basically finds homeless people, takes them in, and makes them runners. It gives them a purpose, and from that they, you know, start eating better, they train, they start thinking about themselves, and they use running as a means to turn their life around. It's called Back on My Feet. It is a nonprofit. Without social media, without email marketing, and without their blog, this organization doesn't have the resources for traditional media. You know, and there's no way in the world that they're the only ones. But one of the things about being social responsible, it tends to be in a very specific area. It could be recycling. It could be energy conservation. Well, if you have a very specific area, it's easier to develop a blog about a very specific area. You know? What is the right action for a company to take when something inaccurate or misleading is posted on a website such as Wikipedia? Well, you correct it. Because one of the things about Wikipedia is you can go in and change things. You know? It seems like every time a company tries to disprove or contradict something that is posted about them, it seems to hurt them more. Is it smarter to just leave it alone? I want you to do a Google search on your own, and it happened earlier this year with Elon Musk and Tesla. And there was a report that came out of the New York Times about a reporter who tried to drive a car from D.C. to Boston. And the reporter, even though he liked the car, really bashed Tesla. And the standard thing would be for Elon Musk to leave it alone and say, da-da-da-da. Elon Musk was very aggressive in Twitter, in the social networks, and through traditional media, basically detailing all the ways that this reporter did not use the car properly, and that's why he could not make the trip in the time allotted. He was very aggressive, and he used Twitter, and he used the blog that Tesla has, to the point where the reporter had to back down and retract statements because he did not follow the instructions when he called Tesla and asked for product support. Even the editor of the New York Times stepped in and said, you know something? He's a journalist. He's not a car driver. This is a new technology. He made some mistakes, yada, yada. If it wasn't for the aggressiveness through social media that Elon Musk did, there's no way that this report would have ever been refuted. Something to think about. All right, so those are all those questions. I think we got through all our questions. I think we got through everything, to be honest with you. Okay, that's not something. While we're on this, last thing I want to end with today is yesterday was 9/11, and we all had 9/11 in our thoughts. But on social media, there was a little bit of a blow up with AT&T. And if you can see this image here, let me blow it up. This is what AT&T put on Twitter. Never forget. And they had the New York skyline, and they had an image superimposed of, remember, the year after 9/11, they put these digital light towers up to remember, in remembrance of the two towers. Social media was very upset that AT&T basically did somewhat of a product placement on top of 9/11. To the point by 1:18 yesterday afternoon, they had to pull the tweet down. But they weren't the only ones that did this, by the way. Walgreens, Macy's, not too much flack here, not too much flack here. We will always remember it's just a flag. There's no product placement there. We hug your family. This is just a kind of a positive message. There was a little bit of flack here that this is, Kobe and the Lakers. And there's a little bit, well, am I promoting the Lakers? Am I promoting the Kobe Bryant brand with 9/11? That's not too kosher. Shutterfly, we'll never forget. No real issue there because there's no real major product placement. But the thing is within social media, something could happen, and so you have the opportunity to react. And maybe someone in AT&T thought that this was okay to do this. Obviously the crowd did not think it was okay, so they did an apology and they pulled it down. If AT&T ignored the crowd and they didn't pull this down by 1:18, by the 6 o'clock news cycle, this would have been 3 or 4 times as big as it was by noon that day. Just something to think about. Real quick, if you want to see the URL to the Microsoft article, I'm due to write a blog post about this, so I might be sending it your way sometime in the near future again. This is a fantastic article about a firm not being market-oriented. Very, very groovy. Okay? Alright, class. Let me sum up. This was our first video. Even through the course of doing this video, I realized there's things that I can improve to make it shorter and more to the point next week. For the following week, it would be better if we can do this kind of a format where it's article nuggets questions. Article nuggets questions. That way I'll be able to, it's easier for me to get to all the questions without having to jump around as much. That said, even though we're going to move on to a new set of articles for Monday, if there are any questions about the articles, about stuff that I said during this video, shoot me an email, or you can just add it to, this that I'll see on Monday, and I'll get to it when we have our next video discussion. Okay? I thank you for your time. We'll chat soon.